It's simply a given that innocent people are going to die in movies, like in real-life tragedies, but how it's depicted can make all the difference. Inspired by a recent Reddit discussion on the subject, these movies all introduced us to affable, harmless characters who were utterly undeserving of the grim fates that befell them in gnarly detail. Everyone has their own preferences as to what qualifies as a deserved and necessary death, but these ones in particular sparked a lot of debate and discourse. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie with What Culture, here with 10 movie characters who got totally unnecessary deaths. Number 10, Gordon Silberman in 2012. This Roland Emmerich disaster flick pulls the typical blockbuster movie gambit of giving our hero, Jackson Curtis, a romantic rival who must, of course, be brutally killed off in order to clear the way for his reconciliation with his ex-wife, Kate. The character in question is Gordon Silberman, a plastic surgeon and amateur pilot who is presented as a thoroughly decent, likeable guy throughout the movie. He's far from the typical a-hole boyfriend character that you can't wait to see die, and yet he still suffers a bafflingly horrific demise all the same. In the movie's third act, Gordon slips while trying to enter one of the arcs intended to save the human race, and despite Jackson's efforts to save him, he gets dragged into the gears that control the ark's loading gate. Worse still, Gordon is dragged in feet first, meaning he has agonizing seconds to comprehend that he's being turned to pulp before his vital organs are actually destroyed. Though not gory in the slightest, it being a PG-13 movie and all, it's still strangely nauseating a demise for such a likeable character. And worse still, it takes Kate all of about 10 minutes of mourning before she's locking lips with her ex-husband again. Number 9, Mathilda in INGLOURIOUS Bastards. Quentin Tarantino takes a pretty no-holds-barred approach to killing off characters in his stories. And it's probably quite easy considering that there aren't very many obviously innocent people in his stories, which generally centre around criminals and morally ambiguous people. One undeniable piece of human collateral damage, though, occurs in Inglourious Bastards when Lieutenant Hickox and several other bastards head to a tavern in German-occupied France to rendezvous with German film star Brigitte von Hammersmark. There's a young woman working at the bar, Mathilda, who does nothing more than humour the boorish Nazis at the bar and serve drinks. She's simply trying to get through her shift. But in an all-timer case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, Mathilda is also at ground zero when a gunfight breaks out between the bastards and the assembled Nazis. As the bullets fly, Mathilda is helpless to do anything but scream and wait to be riddled with machine gun fire, killing her instantly. Number 8, the TOON shoe in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Who Framed Roger Rabbit features one of the most traumatizing scenes in a non-R-rated movie, where not only is an innocent, benevolent character violently erased from existence, but they also happen to be an animated character. Midway through the movie, the evil Judge Doom decides to flex his jurisdictional muscle while investigating the murder of Marvin Acme in Toontown. While speaking to Eddie Valiant, Doom notices a TOON shoe cowering by his trouser leg, and so picks the shoe up and takes it over to a barrel of dip, a caustic chemical mixture that's the only substance that can kill a Toon. Doom, who is trying to clean up Toontown, makes an example out of the poor shoe by slowly lowering it into the dip. We're then forced to watch as the shoe liquefies while descending into the dip, clearly feeling an enormous amount of pain while doing so. Even with the movie's obvious rootings in film noir, this was a very traumatizing scene for a supposedly family-friendly piece of entertainment. And 35 years on, anyone who saw Who Framed Roger Rabbit as a kid will undoubtedly remember the abject horror of witnessing this state-sponsored assassination. One that only becomes more horrifying when you realise that Doom himself was in fact a Toon. Number 7, Hallway Pepsi Guy in Terminator 2 Judgment Day. The first two Terminator movies are jam-packed with examples of innocent bystanders who unfortunately end up crossing paths with a literal killing machine sent back through time from the future. Terminator 2 Judgment Day in particular sees the T-1000 rack up a stupendous body count as it mercilessly slaughters civilians in order to assume their identities or take their vehicles. But by far the most brutal and memorable of the poor saps who get murdered in the sequel is the hallway Pepsi guy, as we'll call him. During the brilliant early moment where John Connor is cornered by both the T-1000 and the T-800 in a mall hallway, Connor is also joined by a maintenance worker who just grabbed a can of ice-cold Pepsi from the nearby vending machine. The man warns John that he's not supposed to be in this area, but before he can do anything else, he's riddled with bullets by the T-1000, who shoots through him to try and hit John, who is fortunate enough to be shielded by the T-800. Just picture it, you're taking a well-earned break from work, think, I'm just going to go and grab myself some refreshments, and all of a sudden you're caught in the middle of a literal war for humanity's future. Not your average day in the office. Number 6. Joyce Dagen in Saw: The Final Chapter. The Saw franchise may be shamelessly sadistic, but the filmmakers nevertheless tend to afford the most brutal deaths to characters who are perceived in some way or another to deserve it, or in the very least are utterly unpleasant individuals. That's not quite the case in Saw: The Final Chapter though, which centres around self-help guru Bobby Dagen being tested after pretending to be a jigsaw survivor for publicity purposes. Bobby's final test sees him having to save his wife Joyce from being roasted alive by inserting metal hooks into his pectoral muscles and lifting himself up, the very same test he lied about as part of his story. Ultimately, Bobby is unable to perform the task, causing blameless, helpless Joyce to be cooked alive inside an ancient torture instrument called the Brazen Bull. Bobby and we, the audience, are forced to watch as Joyce is burned to a charred husk and dies a slow, agonising death. It's an odd move even for Saw, given that the worst thing you can say about Joyce is that she's guilty of marrying a fraudulent douchebag, and really it's Bobby himself who should be inside the bull. Instead, Joyce dies without any possibility of escape, and Bobby seemingly survives. Granted, at this point in the franchise, the traps are being overseen by the utterly unhinged Detective Hoffman, who doesn't much care about fairness or what's deserved. Even so, this death had even die-hard Saw fans raising an eyebrow. Number 5. Nanta in Star Wars Episode 6: Return of the Jedi. The Star Wars franchise only makes innocent character deaths worse because the wider universe has inevitably given a name and backstory to even the most hilariously minor of characters. This includes Nanta, the Ewok who is gunned down by an AT-ST during Return of the Jedi's climactic battle of Endor. Director Richard Marquand ultimately traumatized an entire generation of children by not only showing Nanta get shot to death while fleeing, but also lingering on his comrade Romba, checking on his body and weeping over his corpse. The irony of adding the Ewoks to make Star Wars more appealing to children, only to show the young'uns something as disturbing as this, is certainly a choice. You can argue that Nanta's death wasn't entirely unnecessary, given that it assured everyone the Battle of Endor was serious business, but at the same time it strikes a strange note given what the Ewoks' primary function is throughout the movie. Number 4. Kaori in Akira. Akira is a groundbreaking animation for many reasons, not least because it features one of the most grotesquely unnecessary, if unforgettable, character deaths in movie history, no matter the medium. Tetsuo's innocent girlfriend Kaori is an unfortunate casualty of his climactic transformation into a revolting, growing mass of flesh. And because simply having Kaori get engulfed amid the chaos isn't enough, the film directly shows us the nauseating moment of her demise. While tangled up in Tetsuo's mutated form, we see Kaori struggling to free herself before her body is crushed, her head contorts, she lets out a blood-curdling scream, and finally explodes into a sea of blood. And because that's somehow not awful enough, Tetsuo then mentions that he can feel Kaori dying and that her deathly pain is flowing into him. Though it certainly could have been more graphic, the combination of the imagery, the sound, and the sheer idea of what's happening to Kaori is absolutely horrific. Number 3. Corinne DUFOUR in Moonraker. Moonraker is perhaps the silliest of all the James Bond films, a shameless Star Wars cash-in that also happens to be a lot of fun if you don't take it too seriously. But apparently the filmmakers didn't quite get that memo in regards to one particular brutal death scene. Early in the film, villain Hugo Drax learns that his personal pilot, CORINNE DUFOUR, has been helping 007 behind his back, and so plots to have her offed in supremely gnarly fashion. Drax fires Dufour for her duplicity, and as she walks away, he sicks 2 large Dobermans on her, which chase her through the forest before catching up to her and fatally mauling her. Though the film does spare us the gory details, it's a death scene that sticks out like a sore thumb in such a daft movie. Of course, it makes sense that Drax would want to kill a double-crossing member of his staff, but the cruelty of the scene just seems a little excessive in relation to the crime itself, even for a Bond villain's standards. Number 2. Zara Young in Jurassic World. It would be downright negligent to do a list like this and not talk about Jurassic World's Zara Young, who serves as the personal assistant to the park's operations manager Claire Deering. Zara is a casualty of the initial dinosaur outbreak on Jurassic World, being plucked off the ground and hurled through the air by 2 pteranodons who then let her drop into the Mosasaurus tank. One of the dinos continues to toy with Zara, repeatedly dunking her underwater and pulling her back out, until the Mosasaurus finally emerges and devours the pair of them. Many objected to Zara's death on the grounds that director Colin Trevorrow lingered so long on the prolonged, torturous demise of a totally innocent character, while the death of the movie's villain, Vic Hoskins, was quick and restrained by comparison. Trevorrow did later state that the original cut of the film included more scenes featuring Zara and depicted her as something of a bridezilla. But because these scenes weren't included in the theatrical release, it just made her death seem excessively cruel for no good reason. Number 1. Ali in Terrifier 2. Granted, most slasher films revolve around innocent people being murdered by some sicko for their own giddy kicks. But Terrifier 2's rampant sadism just makes it feel even more excessive. This is especially true in the case of protagonist Sienna's ill-fated friend Ali, whose single crime was refusing to give Halloween candy to the serial killer Art the Clown when he came a-knocking. Art responds by attacking Ali late at night, cutting her eye open, tearing her scalp off, flaying her back, and then breaking her arms and ripping them apart. And just when Art appears to take his leave, he returns with bleach and salt, pouring both into her weeping wounds before finally ripping half her face off. Even then, Ali isn't quite dead the last time we see her. Her skeletal, bloody remains are propped up on her bed to be discovered by her inevitably traumatized mother. Even for hardy horror fans, this was a lot. And the juxtaposition of the innocence of Ali and the unapologetic nastiness of her demise just make it that much worse. And that concludes our list. If you think we missed any, then do let us know in the comments below. And while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe and tap that notification bell. Also, head over to Twitter and follow us there, and I can be found across various social medias just by searching Ellie Littlechild. I've been Ellie with What Culture. I hope you have a magical day, and I'll see you real soon.